summer.
It's ridiculous.
Don't they know they're wasting energy?
And where we have production going on, the air conditioning doesn't work, and these guys work with the blood cells. It's like you.
Or not. Thank you, Anthony. Got me a soda.
Are we ready?
I think so. I hope so.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Wednesday, August 2nd board meeting for the Abington Heights School District. Would everyone please rise and pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Mr. Mirabelli, I assume you're doing the...
I think Dr. Vitale's going to take it away for us.
We're gonna,
So roll call, please.
Mr. Abdallah,
Here.
Mr. Azar, Mr. Fleming,
Here.
Mrs. Henderson,
Here.
Mrs. Karam. Here. Mr. Medensky,
Here.
Mr. Robeson.
Here.
Mrs. Tierney. Here. And Mr. Acker. Thank you.
Can I please have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Medensky,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah.
Yes.
And Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
We'll now move into the superintendent's report.
All right, I only have one item on tonight's superintendent's report. I've said, I believe on occasion that there are a few things that, there are many things that you can do to help serve your community, but one of them is to serve on a school board. Our school board members are not compensated. They provide a lot of time, energy, and expertise to the school community. And that means that school board members have to make sacrifices. They make sacrifices to their immediate family, their distant family, their friends. They make choices. Sometimes maybe they got to skip on a banquet, a dinner, and they do that for the students of our community. And not every decision that our school board members make are easy. In fact, many of the decisions they make, they take very seriously and are very difficult, because oftentimes they have to take off the glasses that they wear and look at it from the perspective of their neighbors and friends. So with that said, I have some certificates from the Pennsylvania School Boards Association that I would like to give to some of our school board members. So the first one is to Mr. Robeson for 8 years of service to the community. Next, Mr. Fleming, 12 years of service to the district. And finally, Mr. Medensky for 12 years of service to the community. we can move on to public comment.
Okay. I'm looking out there to see if there's anyone that wants to make public comments. I think we're okay. Let's move on to the action and discussion items.
Mr. Acker, I'd ask that the board consider a motion to approve the personnel report as presented.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Mr. Acker, I'd ask the board consider a motion to approve the August 2023 volunteer list.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Mr. Acker, I'd ask that the board consider a motion to approve the huddle agreement as presented.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Mr. Acker, I'd ask the board consider a motion to approve the Director of Building and Grounds job description.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Mr. Acker, I'd ask the board consider a motion to approve the School Resource Officer Memorandum of Understanding between Abington Heights School District and South Abington Township. And for the record, this would include the 2 resource officers. We did receive a grant this year through the state to pay for an SRO, which would be at the middle school campus, which includes Newton Ransom Elementary.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion?
And then the other officer would be at the high school. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Roll call?
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Mr. Acker, I'd ask the board consider a motion to approve the AASA National Superintendent Certification Program 2024 cohort for Mr. Schaefer.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
And Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Mr. Acker, I'd ask that the board consider a motion to approve the new story tuition agreements for the 2023-24 school year for students 29A, 30A, 31A, and 32A.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
And Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Before moving on to the next one, I would like to clarify H, approved superintendent to hire employees. On a few or rare occasions, particularly in August, when we are hiring personnel, in some cases, we may hire somebody and then they're going to be held, and we need to hire somebody in the interim. And it would be important that we bring on that person between board meetings, if it falls between a board meeting. And this action item allows me to do that. So with that said, Mr. Acker, I'd ask the board consider a motion to approve the superintendent to hire employees in between board meetings for the 23-24 school year.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
And Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Mr. Acker, I'd ask the board consider a motion to approve the NEIU Student Assistance Program Letter of Agreement for the 23-24 school year.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
And Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Mr. Acker, I'd ask that the board consider a motion to approve the 2022-23 IDEA Use of Funds Agreement.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mr. Medensky?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah?
Yes.
Mr. Fleming?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 8-0.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Schaefer. The next is informational, listing use of facilities. And we have, is there any unfinished business? The new business?
Just, Mr. Acker, just a quick reminder that we have our technology meeting next Wednesday, that's August 9th, at 6:30. Last time we met, we talked about what we're going to do for the summer. That was on June 14th. So the meeting this time, we meet every 2 months, and that meeting is going to occur next week.
Perfect. Is there anything else? I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you all.
I'm so glad we have public participation. So one more month before all the kids go back to school?
Yep. They don't go back late this year. They go back to 7,
Yeah.
the Thursday after. Usually it's the Wednesday, but yeah.
Yeah.
We're trying to soak it all in.
You what? Oh,
Soaking it all in.
yeah.
Soccer starts in 2 weeks.
Ooh,
Yeah, 2 weeks. So then that really,
hopefully the weather stays cooler.
yeah. But then, I mean, you're really kind of homebound at that point. Like, you're not really
Yeah.
going anywhere. So we're going to Boston this weekend.
Oh,
during the
nice.
weekend.
Where do you have family to stay?
Just my husband's like a history buff, and there's just some stuff that he wants to
We,
see. And
that's one of the cities my wife and I want to go to because we've never been to
we
Boston.
went there for like our first anniversary. We did like a
Yeah.
little tour. And then, but he wanted to go and
Oh, nice.